My name is Diana Woods. I am 38 years old. I teach third grade at Linmore Elementary School in Columbus, Ohio, where I have been teaching for 16 years. 16 years of working with children. 16 years of understanding how they think, how they learn, how language lands in a child's mind and becomes part of the way they organize their world. I know how a child's vocabulary is formed. I know, specifically and professionally, the difference between language a child has developed through their own experience and language that has been given to them by an adult. Because children do not have the words for abstract concepts until an adult has handed them those words. And when you hear adult language in a child's mouth, you know where it came from. My daughter Lily is 6 years old. She is in first grade at the same school where I teach, which means I know her teachers, and they know me and the specific warmth of that arrangement, being able to wave to her across the courtyard during recess, hearing from her teacher at the end of a normal day rather than only in moments of concern, is one of the genuine gifts of my professional life. Lily started keeping a journal in the spring. I gave it to her, a soft-covered journal with a purple cover, small enough for her hands, with unlined pages because 6-year-olds do not yet need lines. She had told me she had things she needed to write down. I told her the journal was for anything she wanted, drawings, words, feelings, whatever she needed to put somewhere. I told her it was private, that it was hers. She showed me an entry 3 weeks after my Uncle Gary's visit. She came to me on a Saturday morning while I was making breakfast. She had the journal in her hands, open to a specific page. She said, "Mama, I wrote something I want to show you." She held it up. I looked at it. And what I saw on that page, in Lily's careful, rounded, first-grade handwriting, was not the language of a 6-year-old. It was adult language, specific language. Language about parenting and mistakes and not always knowing best. Language that I recognized not because I had heard it before in general, but because I recognized the specific cadences of it. The framing, the concern-shaped packaging. I knew, looking at those words in my daughter's handwriting, exactly where they had come from. He used my 6-year-old to plant doubt about me inside my own home. He sat alone with her, and with my 8-year-old son Marcus, during my uncle's visit 3 weeks earlier, and he said things to them about their mother that they could not have understood fully and that they absorbed anyway, in the way that children absorb the adult world. Without context, without the tools to evaluate, without the ability to separate what they are being told from what is true. He planted a seed in a 6-year-old's mind. And 3 weeks later, my daughter wrote it down in her journal, because it had been there, growing, and she needed to put it somewhere. I want to tell you about my family before I tell you about Gary, because context matters here in the specific way that context always matters when a story involves someone who has been part of your life for a long time and has always been, in their way, a difficult presence. The Woods family is a large, close Columbus family. My parents, Robert and Paulette Woods, have 4 children, my older sister Andrea, my younger brother James, me and Gary. Wait, let me say that again more clearly. Gary is not my uncle by my parents' generation. Gary is my mother's brother, so technically my uncle is correct, but he and I are close in age, 12 years between us, which means he has always felt more like an older cousin than the uncle of a different generation. He was 22 when I was born and 28 when I started school and 38 when I had Lily. He has never occupied the specific role of elder uncle. He has been more of a peer who happened to have a generational senior title. This matters because Gary has never fully accepted the authority that the actual generational difference would have assigned him if there were more years between us. He is not old enough to be the unquestioned patriarch, and he is not young enough to be my contemporary, and the space he occupies, halfway between, has made him, for most of his adult life, a man who is slightly unclear about where his authority ends. My children are Lily, 6, and Marcus, 8. Their father, my husband Trevor, is a physical therapist who works at an outpatient clinic in Westerville, Ohio, 20 minutes from our home in Columbus. Trevor and I have been married for 11 years. He is the person I call first with everything and the person I trust completely with our children. Trevor knew about Gary, Not everything, there were specific incidents he was not present for, but the general quality of Gary's relationship to my parenting, he knew, he had seen it. He had said, more than once in the years since Lily and Marcus were born, "Diana, I think you should say something to him." I had said more than once, "I know, I will." I had not said something. I had managed Gary's presence the way you manage family members who are difficult, with careful attention to context, with minimization of one-on-one access, with the hope that not naming the problem would somehow make it smaller. The problem did not get smaller. The problem, when I was not paying sufficient attention to it, sat alone with my 6-year-old and said things. My parents are wonderful people who love their grandchildren, and who would be, if they understood fully what Gary had done, horrified. I want to say this clearly because this story is not about a family that is toxic from the top down. It is about a family that is largely good and loving, and in which one person, with a specific set of unchecked opinions and a specific disregard for boundaries, did something that required a clear response. My parents love Gary. He is their youngest child. He has, over his 51 years, been the family member who needed the most managing, not because he is a bad person, but because he is a person whose confidence in his own opinions has consistently exceeded the invitation he has been given to express them. He has strong opinions about how things should be done. He expresses those opinions whether asked or not. He has been doing this for 51 years, and the family has been accommodating it for 51 years, and no one has ever said, directly and specifically, "Gary, this is the line and you have crossed it." I said it, not immediately. I needed time to think and to be certain, and to decide what I was going to do before I did it. But I said it. And the way I was able to say it, clearly and with evidence that could not be explained away, was because of a small purple journal with unlined pages that a 6-year-old had used to write down the things that were living in her head. Gary Woods is 51 years old. He works as a mid-level manager at a logistics company in Columbus, a job he has held for 14 years. He is divorced. His marriage to a woman named Carla ended 8 years ago after 10 years, and the divorce was difficult and left Gary with the specific bitterness of a man who believes, genuinely, that what happened was not significantly his fault. He has 2 adult children from that marriage, both of whom live out of state and are in limited contact with him. I note this not to characterize him cruelly, but because it is relevant to the picture of a man whose opinions about parenting and family have been shaped by a specific experience of watching his own family move away from him. Gary has always had opinions. This is not by itself a problem. Most people have opinions. The specific quality of Gary's opinions that makes them difficult is their combination of certainty and scope. He is certain about a very wide range of things. He holds his certainty with the ease of someone who has not had to defend it, often because the people around him have accommodated it rather than challenged it. His opinions about parenting, specifically about my parenting, began the year Lily was born. Lily was a high-need infant. She had reflux, she was sensitive to overstimulation, she needed a specific sleep routine, and responded badly when that routine was disrupted. I had figured this out by trial and error over the first 4 months of her life, with the help of our pediatrician, and I had arrived at an approach that worked for her specifically. Not the approach Gary would have chosen, not the approach he approved of. He told me, when Lily was 4 months old, that I was coddling her, that I was making her dependent. He told me this at a family dinner, in front of my parents and my sister, with the ease of a man offering an observation rather than an opinion. He said, "You're going to have a hard time getting her to be independent if you keep responding every time she cries." I was 32 years old, a teacher with 12 years of experience with children, and I was holding a 4-month-old infant with reflux who I had finally, after 4 months of trial and error, gotten to a stable sleeping pattern. I said, "She has reflux, Gary, she needs to be held." He said, "That's what they always say." That was the beginning. Over the following 6 years, through Lily's toddlerhood and Marcus's birth and their early childhood, Gary offered opinions on my parenting with the consistency of someone who had decided he had a perspective worth sharing, and was going to share it regardless of invitation. He told me I was too lenient with Marcus when Marcus cried at preschool drop-off. "You need to just walk away, you're making it worse." He told me I was too strict about screen time. He told me, at a Thanksgiving when Lily was 4, that he had noticed I said no too often and that it would damage her confidence. He told me, when Marcus was 6 and going through a difficult adjustment period at school, that the issue was that I was too involved in his social life and was preventing him from developing natural resilience. I managed all of these opinions with the technique I had developed: acknowledge briefly, redirect, minimize future access. I did not argue with Gary in family settings, because arguing with Gary in family settings produced nothing except Gary defending himself more loudly, and the family managing the energy of the argument rather than addressing the substance. I kept my children in my sightline when Gary was present. I did not leave them alone with him. Until the Saturday of the fall visit, when I was in the kitchen for 45 minutes making lunch and Gary was in the living room with Lily and Marcus. And I did not know, for 3 weeks, what had happened in that living room. I want to be precise about the failure I am owning in this story because I think precision about your own failures is as important as precision about other people's. I had known, for 6 years, that Gary had opinions about my parenting. I had known, for 6 years, that he expressed those opinions when given the opportunity. I had managed his access for 6 years, with care, by keeping my children visible. On the Saturday of the fall visit, I trusted that 45 minutes in a living room 10 feet from where I was working was too brief and too proximate to be a significant risk. I was wrong. 45 minutes is a long time in a child's world, and Gary had been waiting, I believe, for an unsupervised 45 minutes for 6 years. I want to document Gary's history with my parenting in some detail, because the visit and what he said to my children were not isolated events. They were the most egregious point on a line that had been building for 6 years, and the line matters for understanding both why I responded the way I did and why the response I chose was the right one. I kept a record, not a formal document. I am not a person who formally documents family conflicts, except when I have a specific reason to. But I am a teacher, and teachers are habitual note keepers, and over the years I had accumulated a set of notes about Gary's comments about my parenting. Not organized, not with any particular purpose in mind. Just noted. The date, what he had said, the context. There were 14 entries across 6 years. Not every comment he had made, the smaller ones I had let go. 14 entries of comments, significant enough that I had felt the need to write them down. The 4-month comment about coddling at the family dinner. A comment when Marcus was 8 months old about the way I was feeding him. Gary had read something about baby-led weaning and had opinions that he did not acknowledge were opinions, but presented as advice. A comment at a Christmas gathering when Lily was 2 about letting her have a tantrum rather than engaging with it. He said the correct response was to walk away. I said our approach was different. He said, "That's how they learn to manipulate." A comment when Marcus was 3 about screen time. A comment when Lily was 4 about saying no too often. A comment when Marcus was 5 about school drop-off. A comment when Lily was 5 about the specific bedtime I kept. He thought it was too late. I had calibrated it to her sleep requirements. A comment about Marcus's social adjustment the previous year. 14 entries. What they had in common. Each one was delivered in the presence of other family members, in a tone of observation rather than accusation, with the framing of someone who was simply sharing a concern. None of them were shouted. None of them were direct attacks. They were the specific form of undermining that is hardest to address because it presents itself as care. I had never in 6 years directly confronted Gary about any of them. I had said in various conversations, things that were adjacent to, "I hear your concern, we do things differently, thank you for your input." I had never said, "Gary, this is not welcome, this is not appropriate, you need to stop." I had accommodated him in the way I have described, and I had carried the low-level weight of his opinions about my parenting for 6 years without making him understand that there was a line. The fall visit. Gary came on a Saturday for what was supposed to be a brief visit. He was passing through Columbus on his way somewhere and had called to ask if he could stop by. I said yes. He arrived at noon. He was in good spirits. He played with the kids in the living room while I finished some work. After about an hour, I went to start making lunch. The kids were with him in the living room. I could hear them playing. He stayed for 2 hours total. When he left, nothing about the visit had seemed alarming. The kids had had a good time. Gary is, I want to say this clearly, not a person who is overtly frightening to children. He is warm with them in the general sense. He brings them things when he visits. He engages with them. The issue is not his manner with them, but the content of what he says when the adults are not present. When I came back from the kitchen the second time, Gary was leaving and both kids were watching him go from the front doorway. Lily had a specific expression that I noticed and filed away, the expression of someone who has received information they are still processing. I asked her that evening if she had had a good time with Uncle Gary. She said yes. I asked if they had talked about anything interesting. She said he had asked about school and about their friends and they had played a game. I said okay. I did not press. I should have pressed. I will always wish, looking back, that I had pressed right then, before the 3 weeks in which Lily processed what Gary had said, and eventually needed to write it down in a journal I had told her was for things she needed to put somewhere. I want to tell you what I know about what happened in that living room during the 45 minutes I was in the kitchen. I know this in 2 forms, from what Lily wrote in her journal, and from what Lily told me when I asked her, after I read the journal entry. This is the reconstruction, as accurately as I can give it. Gary asked Marcus and Lily about school. This is a normal question. They answered normally. He asked about their friends, their teachers, their subjects. He asked Marcus about the soccer team he plays on. He asked Lily about the book she was reading. Normal questions. And then he said something about me. The transition, as I understand it from Lily's description, was this. He mentioned that being a parent was hard work, that I worked very hard, that he knew I tried my best. This framing, the she tries her best framing, is the specific framing of someone who is establishing something before they say the thing they actually came to say. She tries her best implies that best is insufficient. She tries her best is not a compliment. It is a setup. Then he said, you know, moms don't always know best. Even good moms make mistakes. That's just part of being a parent. Then he said, if your mom does something that doesn't seem right to you, it's okay to notice that. It's okay to think for yourselves. These are the sentences that Lily wrote in her journal. Not in this form, in her 6-year-old rendering of them, which I will give you when we get to the journal chapter. But this is the content of what he said, as I was able to reconstruct it. Let me tell you what a teacher hears in those sentences, because what I hear is different from what a non-teacher might hear. What I hear is a specific technique. It is not the crude technique of your mother is wrong. It is the sophisticated technique of planting doubt by permission giving. It is okay to notice. It is okay to think for yourselves. As if noticing and thinking for themselves were things that required his permission and were somehow inhibited by their relationship with me. The permission structure is the tell. Real advice to children about critical thinking does not require them to think critically specifically about their mother. Real advice about questioning authority does not need to focus that questioning on the one authority figure who is most fundamental to a child's sense of safety. The choice of focus, the choice to center this lesson about independent thought specifically on their relationship with me, tells you everything about the intent. He was not teaching them to think independently. He was teaching them to doubt me specifically. And he had wrapped the lesson in language that a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old could not evaluate critically because they are 6 and 8. I do not know if Marcus absorbed the same thing that Lily did. Marcus is 2 years older and had, by the time of the visit, a more developed capacity for evaluating adult language. He has not mentioned the conversation to me. When I asked him, gently, after I read the journal, whether he remembered what Uncle Gary had talked to them about, he said something about how parents make mistakes but it's okay. He said it with the shrug of an 8-year-old who had heard a thing that didn't fully land. The 8-year-old's processing had been different from the 6-year-old's. But Lily was 6, and what Gary had said had landed in Lily the way certain adult things land in very young children, completely, without the scaffold of context that older children can provide for themselves. She had received the words without the critical apparatus to evaluate them. She had walked around with them for 3 weeks. And then she had done the thing I had told her the journal was for. She had put them somewhere. 3 weeks is a long time in a 6-year-old's inner life. It is long enough for something to settle, to become integrated into the background hum of how a child understands their world. I want to tell you about those 3 weeks, because they are part of the story. The week after the visit was ordinary. No observable difference in Lily's behavior at home or at school. She was her usual self, curious, social, slightly dramatic about minor inconveniences in the way of 6-year-olds who are old enough to have opinions and young enough to feel those opinions very intensely. The second week, I noticed something. Small things. Lily watching me when I made decisions that affected her, with a quality of attention that was slightly different from her usual observation. Not suspicious, not cold, just a slight hesitation before accepting things I said, a slight extra beat before she said okay. The kind of thing that is invisible if you are not paying close attention and visible if you are. I am a teacher, I pay close attention to children as a professional matter. I noticed. I did not know what to attribute it to. Developmental shift. 6-year-olds are in the process of individuating, of developing the understanding that their parents are separate people with separate perspectives, which involves a natural and appropriate expansion of skepticism. I attributed it, initially, to this. A normal developmental thing. The third week, Lily asked me at bedtime on a Wednesday whether I sometimes made mistakes. I said yes, everyone makes mistakes, that's part of how we learn, she said. Even in parenting, even with me and Marcus. I said yes, I was not a perfect parent, I tried my best but I made mistakes sometimes. She said, how do you know when you're making a mistake? I said, I try to listen. To you and Marcus, to Daddy, to my own conscience. And when I realize I've made a mistake, I try to fix it and do better. She said, okay, and she turned over and went to sleep. I went downstairs and told Trevor about the conversation. He said, that's a big question for a Wednesday bedtime. I said, I know. He said, what do you think is going on? I said, I don't know yet. I sat with it for another week. The Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the visit, Lily came into the kitchen while I was making breakfast with the journal in her hands. She said, Mama, I wrote something I want to show you. I have been a teacher for 16 years. I know the difference between a child who is showing you something happy and a child who is showing you something they need help processing. Lily's face, that Saturday morning, was the face of a child who had been carrying something and had decided it was time to not carry it alone. I said, okay, sweetheart, show me. She held up the journal, I took it, I looked at the page. I want to pause here and tell you something about what it means to read adult language in a child's handwriting. I have been a teacher for 16 years. I have read thousands of things children have written. I know the vocabulary of a 6-year-old and the vocabulary of a 7-year-old and the vocabulary of an 8-year-old with the specificity of someone who has spent her career immersed in children's developing language. When I looked at Lily's journal page, I saw a 6-year-old's handwriting, and I saw words that a 6-year-old does not have. And I understood, in the specific professional way of someone who works with children, exactly what I was looking at. I want to tell you about the journal entry in full, because the full text matters, and because I will return to it at the end of this story. The entry was dated 2 weeks after Gary's visit. Lily had written it in pencil, carefully, in the rounded block printing that first graders use before they develop cursive. The entry was 9 lines. I am going to describe it precisely. The first 3 lines were normal 6-year-old content. What she had done at recess, that she had a cheese sandwich for lunch, that Marcus had been mean about the remote control and she was still mad about it. The next 6 lines were different. She had written, Uncle Gary said moms don't always know best. He said even good moms make mistakes. He said it's okay to think for herself. He said if mommy does something that doesn't seem right, it's okay to notice that. I don't know what that means. I love mommy. I want to give you that entry in its full form because the full form is the evidence. The last two sentences, I don't know what that means, I love mommy, are what I return to most often when I think about this story. My 6-year-old had received information she could not process. She did not know what it meant. And in the uncertainty of not knowing what it meant, the thing she had anchored herself to was, I love mommy. She did not write, Uncle Gary made me feel bad. She did not write, I think mama is wrong about things. She wrote, I don't know what that means, I love mommy. The 6-year-old's response to cognitive dissonance, the gap between what an adult had told her and the fundamental truth of her own experience, was to hold onto the truth she knew. I read the entry twice. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor because I needed to sit down, and Lily came over and sat beside me, and I put my arm around her and I said, Thank you for showing me this, sweetheart. Can I ask you some questions about what Uncle Gary said? She said yes. I asked her if she remembered when he had said those things. She said on the day he visited when I was in the kitchen. I asked if Marcus had been there. She said yes. I asked if Gary had said anything else. She thought about it and said, he said we should think for ourselves. I asked if she knew what that meant. She said, I think it means making my own choices. I said, that's a good way to think about it. Independent thinking is a good thing. Can I tell you why it felt a little confusing? She said yes. I said, because when he said to think for yourselves specifically about me, it was like he was suggesting that I might not be trustworthy. And that's confusing when someone you know tells you that about someone you love. She said, I do trust you, Mama. I said, I know you do, sweetheart, and that is exactly right. You should trust your own experience. I held my daughter in the kitchen for a while. Then I called Trevor, who was at the grocery store, and I told him what I had found. He came home in 15 minutes. I showed him the journal entry. He read it once. He put it down on the counter. He said, Diana, what do you need to do? And I said, I need to make sure Gary never has unsupervised access to my children again, and I need the family to understand why. I want to sit with the journal entry one more time, because I spent a great deal of time sitting with it before I did anything. The first thing I kept returning to was the accuracy of the transcription. Lily had written, with the spelling errors of a first grader, a nearly verbatim account of what Gary had said. The language was too specific, too adult, too structurally complex to have been invented by a 6-year-old or remembered imperfectly. She had transcribed it, not the way a child paraphrases something, but the way a child who is trying to hold onto exact words holds onto exact words. She had written it down because the words were lodged in her, and she was trying to get them out. The second thing was the phrase, if mommy does something that doesn't seem right, it's okay to notice that. This is the sentence that, as a teacher, tells me the most about the intent of what Gary said, because this is not a general statement about critical thinking. This is a specifically targeted instruction about the child's relationship with their mother. The subject is mommy. The action is noticing when mommy is wrong. A person who is giving genuine advice about independent thought does not need to target it at a specific person in the child's life. The third thing was her question, I don't know what that means. This is what 6-year-old cognitive dissonance looks like. She had received information she could not integrate. She did not know what to do with it. And she had sat with it for 2 weeks, in the bedroom she sleeps in every night, in the house she comes home to after school, in the presence of the person she had been told might not always know best, and she had finally needed to put it somewhere. The fourth thing was I love mommy. At the end, after all of it, as if the writing of the confusing adult words required the anchoring of the thing she knew. The 6-year-old's response to uncertainty, the familiar thing, the true thing, the thing that had not changed. I am a teacher. I have seen children process difficult things in their writing many times over 16 years. What I know about how children process is this. When a child writes something down, it is because the something is occupying significant space in their mind and they need to externalize it. The act of writing is the act of saying, "This is real, and it needs to be somewhere outside of me." Lily had been carrying Gary's words for 2 weeks before she wrote them down. 2 weeks of sleeping in her house, and going to school and eating dinner with her parents, and watching me do the ordinary things of parenting, making decisions, setting boundaries, saying no and yes, the daily calibration of raising a child, with the background noise of a grown man's suggestion that she should notice when I got it wrong. The depth of that, the specific weight of what Gary had placed in my 6-year-old, is what I needed to sit with before I acted. Not because acting required deep thought, because I needed to be certain that what I was going to do was proportionate to what had happened and was being done for the right reasons. And the right reasons were not my own anger. The right reasons were my daughter's unlined journal page and the 2 weeks she had spent not knowing what that meant. Trevor and I talked that Saturday for 3 hours. We talked about what had happened, what we knew, what our options were. We talked about the children and what the right response was for them. We talked about the family and how the right response would land there. We talked about Gary and what his behavior indicated about his capacity to be a safe person for our children going forward. At the end of 3 hours, we had 2 decisions. The first, Gary would not have unsupervised access to our children, not for the foreseeable future and not contingent on an apology or a conversation, not dependent on anything Gary did, because a restriction of this nature should not be conditional on the cooperation of the person being restricted. I did not need Gary to understand, agree, or apologize in order to keep my children safe. The decision was mine to make, and it did not require his input. The second, I was going to tell the family, not in a confrontational way, not at a gathering specifically organized for that purpose. But when the question came up, and I knew the question would come up, because Gary would tell people I had restricted his access and Gary would frame it as me overreacting, I was going to answer it. Clearly and specifically, with the journal entry. I called Gary that Sunday. Trevor was with me, not to gang up on him, but because Trevor is my partner and this was our family, and he deserved to be part of the conversation. I called Gary and I said, "I need to talk to you about something you said to my children during your last visit." He said, "Okay." I said, "Lily told me and wrote down that you told her and Marcus that moms don't always know best, that I make mistakes, and that it was okay to notice when I did things that didn't seem right to them. Is that what you said?" A pause, then, "Diana, I was just trying to." I said, "I'm not asking for an explanation right now. I'm asking if that's what you said." Another pause. Then, "I might have said something like that, yes. I was trying to teach them about critical thinking." I said, "Okay, I need you to know that as a result of that conversation, you will not have unsupervised time with my children going forward. This is not negotiable and it is not temporary. It is the appropriate response to an adult who used access to my children to undermine their relationship with their mother. I am not angry. I am being clear." He said, "Diana, you are overreacting. I was having a normal conversation with them about thinking for themselves. You are taking this completely out of proportion." I said, "I understand you see it that way. I want you to know that the decision stands." He said, "I'm going to talk to Mom and Dad about this." I said, "That's your choice." I said goodbye, I hung up. And I told Trevor he's going to tell everyone I'm overreacting. And Trevor said, "Let him, we have Lily's journal." Gary told my parents. He told them that I had banned him from seeing my children over a normal conversation about critical thinking, and that I was, in his phrasing, completely overreacting. He told them that the conversation had been educational, and that he was hurt by my response, and that he thought I needed to reconsider. My mother called me. She was gentle and concerned in the way of a mother who loves both of her children and does not want to adjudicate between them. She said, "Gary says there was a misunderstanding. He's very hurt." I said, "Mom, I understand he's hurt. I want to show you something the next time we're together. Can we talk more when we're face to face?" She said yes. My sister Andrea called me. Andrea is 4 years older than me and has 2 adult children and has known Gary for her entire life and knows, better than my parents do, the pattern of his opinions and their delivery. She said, "What happened?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Do you have something in writing?" I said, "My daughter's journal." She said, "Show it to Mom and Dad when you're ready." She said it with the specific directness of someone who knows what the evidence will do. My brother James called. James is 2 years younger than me. He said, "Gary says you banned him from seeing the kids." I said, "That's accurate." He said, "What did he do?" I said, "He told my 6-year-old that I don't always know best and that she should notice when I do things that don't seem right to her." A silence. Then, "He said that to Lily," I said. "She wrote it in her journal, in her handwriting, with his words." James said, "Oh," he said it the way you say "oh" when the picture has just become completely clear. He said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Nothing right now, just be there when it comes up at Thanksgiving." He said, "I'll be there." Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Gary had told the family his version, the overreacting version, the critical thinking lesson version. The family had his version and they were waiting, in the way families wait, to understand fully what had happened. I was going to show them, not with an argument, not with a counter-narrative, with a journal entry written by a 6-year-old in purple rounded first-grade handwriting. Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Columbus. Every year for 38 years. The same table, the same food, the same family, with modifications over the years as people married and had children and some people died and new people arrived. This year, my parents, Andrea and her husband, James and his girlfriend, Gary, Trevor and me and the kids. Gary was present. We had not spoken since the Sunday phone call. He was civil in the way of someone who is performing civility while waiting for vindication. He interacted with the kids briefly, a hello, a remark about Marcus's height, a compliment on Lily's dress, and the kids responded politely in the way children respond when they can sense an adult tension they have not been fully briefed on. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared and the pie was out, and the table had the post-meal ease that Thanksgiving tables get when the food has been good and the gathering has gone smoothly, my father said. Gary said there was some kind of disagreement about the kids. I don't want to bring up anything at dinner, but I'd like to understand what happened. He said it with the measured tone of a man who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided this was it. Not accusatory, genuinely seeking to understand. Gary said, I had a normal educational conversation with the kids about thinking for themselves, and Diana has decided I can't see them unsupervised. I think it's an overreaction to a conversation that was completely harmless. I looked at my father, I looked at my mother, I looked at Gary. I reached into the bag I had brought to the table, the same bag I had brought every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember, the bag with the wine and the contribution to the meal, and I took out the journal. Not dramatically. Just, I reached in and I took it out. I said, "Can I read you what Lily wrote?" Gary said, "That is a child's private journal. You are going to read a child's private journal at Thanksgiving dinner," I said. "Lily knows I am going to read it. I asked her permission. She said yes." This was true. I had asked Lily that morning whether it was okay if I showed the family what she had written. She had said, "Will it help them understand?" I said, "I think it will." She said, "Then yes." She was 6 years old. She had given her permission. I opened the journal to the page. I read it aloud. I read it exactly as she had written it. The first 3 lines about recess and the cheese sandwich and Marcus and the remote control. Then the 6 lines. I read, Uncle Gary said moms don't always know best. He said even good moms make mistakes. He said it's okay to think for herself. He said if mommy does something that doesn't seem right it's okay to notice that. I don't know what that means. I love mommy. I closed the journal. The table was completely silent. Not the silence of disagreement, not the held breath of people taking sides. The silence of people who have just heard the words of a 6-year-old who did not know what they meant but loved her mother anyway, and who are processing that. My mother looked at Gary. My father looked at Gary. Andrea looked at the table. James looked at his girlfriend and then at Gary. Gary said, "That is completely out of context. I was trying to." My mother said, "Gary, just his name." with a weight I had not heard in her voice before. He stopped. My father said, "Diana's right, you should not have said those things to the children." He said it simply, without drama, with the authority of a man who has arrived at a clear position. Gary did not speak for the rest of the dinner. I put the journal back in the bag. I ate my pie. The table around me slowly returned to the ordinary warmth of a Thanksgiving gathering, careful, a little tender but present. And Lily, who was at the other end of the table drawing a turkey on her paper napkin, looked up at me and smiled. I smiled back. Gary left early that Thanksgiving. He said goodbye to my parents and left before dessert plates were cleared. He has not contacted me since. He has not apologized. I am not waiting for an apology because the restriction on his access to my children is not conditional on one. My parents called me the following Sunday. My father said, "We owe you an apology for not seeing this sooner. Gary has been saying things like this for a long time and we have been accommodating it for a long time and that was a mistake." My mother said, "I should have said something to him years ago. I'm sorry." I told them I accepted the apology and that I loved them. I meant both things. My sister Andrea texted me that evening. "That was perfectly done." I texted back a single heart. Lily does not know the full account of what happened at Thanksgiving. She knows that I read her journal entry to the family and that they understood it and that Uncle Gary will not be having private time with her and Marcus anymore. She asked once why. I said, "Because what he said to you was not something I want him to be able to say again." She said, "Is he in trouble?" I said, "He learned something important about what's okay to say to children." She seemed satisfied with this. She went back to drawing. Marcus knows more. He is 8 and processes things at 8-year-old scale. He asked me, a week after Thanksgiving, if Uncle Gary had been wrong to say the things he said. I said, "Yes, he should not have said those things to you and Lily." Marcus said, "Because it's about adult stuff and we're kids." I said, "Exactly right, well said." He looked pleased and went to find his soccer ball. Trevor that evening said, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Good, I feel good." He said, "I know. He has been saying that a lot lately and I have been appreciating it every time." I am 38 years old. I am an elementary school teacher. I work with children every day and I understand how they think and what they need and how adult language lands in a child's mind and what it does there. What I keep from this story is the specific clarity of knowing what I needed to do and doing it. Not in anger, or not in the anger that is reactive and impulsive. In the measured, precise, professional clarity of someone who has been given evidence of harm and has decided what the proportionate response is. I keep my daughter's journal. Not the entry itself, I photographed it, so the evidence is preserved, but the journal. The purple cover, the unlined pages, the first-grade handwriting. The journal I gave her in the spring because she said she had things she needed to write down. The journal that turned out to be the place where she put the thing that was living in her head until she could not carry it alone anymore. I told her after Thanksgiving that showing me that journal entry was one of the bravest things she had ever done. She asked what brave meant. I said, "Doing something that feels scary because it's the right thing to do." She thought about it. She said, "I was a little scared." I said, "I know, you did it anyway." She said, "Because I love you, Mama." I said, "I know, sweetheart, and I love you." He used my 6-year-old to plant doubt about me inside my own home. She wrote it down, in purple unlined pages, with his words and her love. And she gave it to me. That's what I keep. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Week 2 closes here. This story is for every parent who has had a family member undermine their relationship with their children. For everyone who has heard it framed as educational, or just having a conversation, or critical thinking. The framing does not change the content. What was said to my daughter was targeted specifically at her relationship with me. The intent was not education. The intent was doubt. And doubt planted in a 6-year-old about the person who is most fundamental to her sense of safety is not a small thing. I want to say one thing directly. Protecting your children from the people who cause them harm does not require the approval of those people or the understanding of your extended family. It requires your knowledge of what happened and your willingness to act on it. The family understanding came because I had evidence. But the decision, the restriction, the clear boundary that came before the evidence was shared. It came because I am their mother and I had read the journal. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me if a family member has ever overstepped with your children. Tell me what you did. I read every single one. Week 3 begins soon. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this, more stories coming. I'll see you next time.